Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Creative Activity in the Older Population webinar. And I'm particularly interested in it, being of that age myself and wanting to stay nimble and imaginative and engaged and positive. And hopefully today we're going to hear how that can be achieved and whether and how creativity can enhance our lives. This online gathering is organised by the Department of Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht, Sport and Media's Creative Ireland programme, who in collaboration with Tilda, the Irish Longitudinal Study on Ageing in Trinity College, have done some research into the role that creativity plays in the lives of older people. There was a very good piece, by the way, in the Irish Times today by Sylvia Thompson about the good that ballroom dancing can do for your brain. So maybe worth having a look at. And we are today going to hear brief presentations by three panelists, including the researcher who has put together this special report. And we'll have time for a discussion and for any of your questions that you can put up online, questions and observations in the on the Q&A function. So we will head to our first speaker, who is Tanya Benotti. Tanya is the director of the Creative Ireland programme since 2018. She served previously for more than 5 years as chief executive of the advertising trade body, the Institute for Advertising Practitioners in Ireland, and chief executive of Theatre Forum Ireland. She's a founder and a former chief executive of Screen Producers Ireland. Tanya Benotti.
Thank you so much for joining us for this lunchtime webinar. A little bit of background first about the Creative Ireland programme. We're a culture-based, all-of-government programme. We're based in the Department of Culture, and the idea is that we are designed to promote individual, community and national well-being. And the programme strives to do that in two ways. First, by promoting an understanding and appreciation of the value of creativity in all its forms. And secondly, trying to influence decision makers to embed creativity across public policy. In order to deliver on that mission, the programme has collaborated widely with other government departments and state agencies and public bodies, as well as with individual artists and creative organisations at a community level, to embed initiatives and policies that increase access to creative activities and creative engagement. Under our Creative Communities initiative, which we deliver in partnership with local authorities, we've invested significantly in well-being initiatives in relation to positive ageing, mental well-being and disability. And it's all about locally developed and locally community-led initiatives delivered by local authorities directly into communities and into healthcare facilities, all in support of health and well-being. In 2019 and 2020, we began to work more closely with our colleagues in the HSE and the Department of Health on areas of mutual interest. And famously, on the 12th of March 2020, we co-hosted an event with our colleagues on the health side called Vitamin C, Creativity and its Role in Mental Wellbeing. And while Professor Luke O'Neill was chairing that event for us in Dublin, meanwhile, the Taoiseach was on the steps of the Irish Embassy in Washington announcing the first public health lockdown. So the roller coaster has not really stopped since then. Many of you who joined us that day will recall that Minister Catherine Martin announced a series of projects really around creative opportunities for older people. This was a scheme devised in 2020, and it was all about supporting positive ageing, mitigating the negative impact of social cocooning, and developing new forms of creative engagement for older people. One of the projects announced back then by Minister Martin in July 2020 was our project with the team at Tilda. And I guess, why did we do that? Well, I suppose in Creative Ireland, we see the excellent work that individuals and organisations in the arts, culture and creative sectors, as well as those in the health and social care sector, undertake on a daily basis in support of the health and well-being of older people. However, we also understood that more robust and extensive knowledge and evidence was required for decision makers with responsibility for health policy and investment. So the Creative Ireland programme will continue to support the development of top-class research as an aid to future decision-making. I'd obviously like to thank Professor Roseanne Kenny and Dr. Scarlett for their impressive and valuable research that you're going to hear today. The headline finding for me of this research, which is that older adults who participate in creative activities enjoy a higher quality of life than their contemporaries who do not, won't surprise many of you at this webinar. I think the findings are a confirmation of the powerful case for increasing participation and opportunities to be creative and to expand those opportunities as we age, because we think it can improve health and well-being. I think the significance of today's research findings is that they give us robust evidence that supports more efficient targeting of those efforts to promote creative engagement. And to me, it's a call to arms. I don't want to preempt Dr. Scarlett's research, but it is quite troubling that some of the impediments to and the cohorts of people who are not engaging in these activities and who do not have access to them mirror research done by the ESRI, and Dr. Emer Smith is on this webinar. And I think it's a real call to arms for us to do better. So in 2020, the Creative Ireland programme worked with partners to deliver creative initiatives in over 250 hospitals and residential care facilities and across communities nationwide. We look forward to continuing that work. And I wish to finish because I always think it's so important to have the voice of the participants at the heart of everything we do. So the video I'm about to show you, it's a world premiere. And I think it captures a flavour of the initiatives that Creative Ireland has supported in the last year. And really, it's the voice of older adults during the height of the pandemic who talk about the joy and the pleasure they get from this participation. So I might ask my colleague Paul just to play you that video.
To me, creativity is magic. And if you think about an acronym for magic is my ability to go into my center, because that's where the magic happens. We all have that creativity within us, and people use it in different ways. You know, I just happen to use it with paint, with wool, with cotton, because I design and knitwear. And then my paintings, that's an expression of how I'm feeling as well. The Kildare COVID notebook was enabling me to express every day little things that I was doing, like a record of the lockdown. And because we couldn't go out and we were, isolated here, I put pictures in it, photographs of what I was doing, and then a brief overview of my day and my creativity. But I found it amazing. It really helped me focus.
The most important thing for me was my first grandchild was born. Although he only lives 2 kilometres from me, for 6 weeks I couldn't meet him. We couldn't touch, we couldn't talk, except through a glass window. So the only way I could contact him was to write him letters and record it. So I wrote to Liam, is his name, and some of those letters are recorded in the COVID diaries. I think the main emphasis in creativity is to give life form to your imagination. You can transport your mind to a different area and write about it, in whatever genre you choose.
All the people here in Shrewsbury House were looking forward to the Dorchester people coming. They went down a treat. There was 3 people playing violins and 1 guy was on the cello. My involvement was just to sing my song, which I love doing. I was delighted when I masked up. And I think basically every individual likes to be seen and heard. We all need attention. When you don't get attention, you get tension. Music is an outlet. It elevates my mood. It relaxes the mind, calms the body, so basically it's therapeutic.
In Borris in County Carlow, there is a great tradition for lace making. When I saw this Borris Lace project being advertised, I thought it would be nice to learn the skill. It's what you would call nowadays a very mindful activity, because you have to focus on it. You can't pick it up and put it down again. You have to stick at it for a while. It's quite delicate. Everybody has a talent, and you have to find it. And whether that's working with your hands, writing, painting, sewing, everybody can do something. And some of us don't know what we can do, and a lot of us can do a lot more than we think we can.
You need to feel you belong somewhere. And maybe at our age, you've kind of gone through the stage of where your children have moved on and maybe you don't feel needed anymore. You actually have to fall back then on yourself, and you have to decide to connect with other people. Doorstep Dance was an initiative to get people of my age moving and connected after lockdown. And it was such a timely occurrence because I had become sort of locked in as well as locked down. The next thing, this world of music and movement came into my life. It's like as if there was somebody turned a key and opened the door.
Our next speaker is Roseanne Kenny, who's Professor of Medical Gerontology at Trinity College Dublin. She's the founding principal investigator of the Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging. She is also Director of Mercer's Institute for Successful Aging in St. James's Hospital, Dublin. And creative life, of course, is one of the 4 pillars of equal import in MISA, emphasizing the weight and the value that is placed on creativity to enhance health and well-being. So over to you, Roseanne Kenny.
Thank you very much, Olivia, and thank you, Tanya, for your contribution. And one of the statements made by the participants in the video is a really nice entree to what I'm about to say, that creativity gives life form to your imagination. And I'm going to start, therefore, by something from a behavioral neurologist in the University of California, who stated, and who's done an awful lot of work in this, Bruce Miller, while brains inevitably age, creative abilities do not deteriorate, thus reinforcing the contribution they make to brain capacity. And I'm going to explain a little bit about that in a moment. But he went on to say that imagination and creativity flourish in later life, helping us to realize unique, unlived potentials and consolidate crystalline intelligence. That's the intelligence we get from learning and from past experiences. So is all of this just soft talk, or is there any hard biology behind creativity? And indeed there is. And that's what I'm going to share with you now to contextualize the findings from Tilda, which Siobhan will present, putting creativity in the context of biology at a cell level. Why is it so good for us? We know that human and rat brains have the capacity, the ability to form new brain cells right up to the end, new blood vessels to feed those cells, and new communication bridges between cells. All of this constitute brain reserve. By that I mean, of course, brain function, but also the ability, kind of like a bank. If you've got good brain reserve, you've got a lot of money saved. So on a rainy day, you can draw on that reserve, on that money, so that actually you don't feel the pain or the pinch. And that's why brain reserve is so very, very important. And we know that creativity actually influences 3 main areas of the brain, which are the most important for brain functions at all stages in life, but particularly when we get older. The first of those areas is the hippocampus, which is the big memory powerhouse of the brain. The second is the olfactory bulb, or smelling bulb, and that's also one of the first to be involved in COVID. So a number of those listening will be aware of the importance of the olfactory bulb, but of course it's hugely important for the senses. And our sense of smell governs, of course, our ability to create and to recall. And the third area of the brain is the cerebral cortex. And that's the area up here on each side. And that pretty much governs all of the big factors that help with brain function and brain health: concentration, our understanding of something, our awareness of what's happening around us, our memory, our language, and even consciousness. So creativity enhances new cell formation and new bridges and new blood flow in those three areas which pretty much govern everything in the brain. That's one of the biological reasons why it's so important for us. And because it enhances brain reserve, it enables us to actually tolerate more brain pathology, which is an inevitable consequence of aging. So, i.e., less likely to manifest with some of the manifestations of dementia, for example. And apart from those factors, of those structural factors that link creativity with cell health, it also enhances relaxation and stress reduction. And we know again from experiments that it reduces stress hormones. And by reducing those stress hormones, enables positive emotions, more higher self-esteem, better social competence, and overall good mood, less depression. Siobhan will come on to that in a moment. And the final way that it benefits at a cellular level is through social engagement. Social engagement, i.e. quality friendship and frequency of interacting with quality friends and friendship, is actually as powerful a risk factor for reducing heart disease and death from heart disease as physical activity, high cholesterol, and smoking combined. So friendship and social engagement really matters to physical health. And of course, creativity is a wonderful channel to combine the benefits of creativity with social engagement. So Olivia, that kind of gives a little bit of background to why these findings and generally creativity is so important at all ages, as Tanya said, referring to the earlier ESRI study in younger cohorts, but particularly as we get older, in terms of ensuring that we have money in the bank to manage our brain and physical pathology going forward.
And you know, Roseanne, one of the most important things you said there, certainly that caught my attention immediately, is the fact that this sort of creative activity could reduce, you put it very carefully, reduce the manifestations, I suppose, the effects of dementia. And, you know, one is at that age where one is dreading that may be coming down the road. So that's absolutely fascinating, that this could help in terms certainly of reducing the effect of dementia, as well as all the other good things that it does. So now our third speaker is Dr. Siobhan Scarlett. She is the Senior Data Manager at Tilda, working on the study of sleep and cognition in older adults. She has a PhD in medical gerontology. As a postdoctoral researcher, she led the research for and is the lead author of the Creativity in the Aging Population report. And now she's going to present its main findings. Siobhan.
Thanks so much, Olivia, for that introduction. And thanks everyone for joining us here today as we launch our report, Creativity in the Aging Population, Findings from the Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging. As we're all aware, in March 2020, restrictions were introduced to try to curb the spread of COVID-19. Many of these measures, although they were necessary, contributed to isolation and lost social links in our older population. Tilda research has already shown us that average loneliness more than doubled during the first COVID-19 lockdown compared with just 2018. And depression was now reported by 25% of older adults compared with just 10% in 2018. We saw lower quality of life among the population, and a qualitative research report also found that there were increased feelings of isolation amongst older adults. In July 2020, the Creativity in Older Age program was launched. This program sought to introduce creative initiatives in the older population to offset some of the effects we found with COVID-19 restrictions on the older population. Creativity is quite wide-ranging. When we talk about creativity, it can encompass both active and passive participation in activities. What we're referring to is anything that's involving making, doing, creating, playing, dancing, writing, watching, looking at, or even listening. Research across the world has repeatedly shown that creative activity in older age is beneficial for both physical and mental health. There have been numerous intervention studies which have shown positive impacts on participants. Participants of the initiatives have reported improved general health, increased life satisfaction, increased physical activity, increased feelings of self-worth, decreased healthcare utilization, and also reduced feelings of isolation. The participants of the study were encouraged to take better care of their physical health because they wanted to continue engaging in the initiatives, and they also became reintegrated with society, growing new networks of shared social supports. In the Irish context, we know that socio-demographic gradients in participation are still apparent. Research from the Growing Up in Ireland study from Dr. Emer Smith showed that there was higher involvement among adolescents who came from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. Smith suggested that the patterns which were established in younger lives would likely contribute to involvement in later life also. To date, however, little is known about the participation levels among the older community-dwelling adult population of Ireland. Our research sought to assess participation in creative activity among the older 50s population in Ireland. We wanted to understand driving factors of engagement and the impact of participation on health and well-being. And we also wanted to understand the impact of participation in creative activity during the first COVID-19 lockdown. We used data from the Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging, or Tilda. Tilda is a population representative study of community-dwelling adults aged 50 years and older, and also their spouses of any age. The Tilda sample was selected using random sampling to create a population representative sample. Our interviewers visited 25,600 households, and anywhere an individual aged 50 years and older was present, they were invited to partake in the Tilda study. We had 8,175 adults aged 50 years and older taking part in wave 1, and this was a response rate of 62%. Our first wave of data collection took place in 2009 to 2011, and it included 3 components. We had a self-interview, which captured detailed information on the social, economic, and health situation of the participants. Following this, we provided our participants with a self-completion questionnaire, which captured information on social activities, creative activities, relationships, and also more sensitive information. And finally, a health assessment was offered, which captured objective health measures for our participants. We've completed 5 waves of the study to date, and the 6th wave of data collection is due for completion at the end of this year. This study focused on wave 1 for baseline participation levels, and also used wave 5, taking place approximately 9 years later, so that we could assess change in participation levels over time. We also used data from a uniquely timed self-completion questionnaire, which was administered to participants in July 2020. This questionnaire focused on the lives of the Tilda participants during the COVID-19 lockdown and asked about their engagement in creative activities during this time as compared with before the COVID-19 measures. Our creative activity measures were drawn from the self-completion questionnaire. We asked participants about their frequency of involvement in the number of active and passive forms of creative activity. We asked about going out to plays, films, and concerts. We asked about reading books or magazines, listening to music or radio, and also spending time in hobbies or creative activities. With this data, we could assess weekly involvement in activities. And we also created a composite creative activity score, which measured the combined number of activities and frequency, where higher scores would represent a higher magnitude of involvement in creative activity. Tilda also contains a wealth of other information for us to investigate. We covered demographic characteristics such as age, sex, education, the location of their residence, and income groups. We covered physical health, including self-rated health, vision, hearing, pain, disability, and also chronic conditions. We covered psychological health, looking at depression, stress, worry, loneliness, and quality of life, and also behavioral health, looking at physical activity measures and smoking behaviors. We first looked at the baseline participation levels of the older population. Our sample in wave 1 was on average 64.2 years old and 51% were female. Participation levels were quite high amongst all of the activities, and we found that only fewer than 20% actually reported that they never spent time in creative activities. On a weekly basis, we found that 54% were involved in creative activities, 94% listened to music or the radio on a weekly basis, 74% read books or magazines, and though just 2% reported that they went to movies, plays, or concerts weekly, we know that accessibility or cost may come into play here. Our creative activity scores remained quite consistent until around age 75, where they began to decline much more rapidly. And we also found that scores were lower among adults living in rural areas, potentially because of accessibility. But we did find that they were higher among females, higher among those with a higher educational attainment, and also higher among those with higher income groups, as we saw in the Growing Up in Ireland study too. Next, we looked at our change in participation over 9 years. And by 2018, the average age of our sample was 70.4 years. We saw that participation still remained quite high, and 52% were still reporting that they spent time weekly on creative activities. We did see a decline in the average creative activity score, but only marginally, from 19.1 to just 18.5. We do see some shifts in participation. We found that 66% maintained low or moderate activity over the time points, but 10% actually declined from high activity to low or moderate. We saw that 19% maintained a high level of creative activity between the 2 time points, and 15% actually increased from low or moderate activity to high activity over the 9 years. In terms of health and well-being, we first looked at physical health. We found that those who were reporting worse general health, worse vision, and those who said that they had a disability were associated with lower creative activity scores. The trend was particularly strong among females who were aged 50 to 79 reporting fair or poor health, with them reporting lower scores than their counterparts reporting excellent, very good, or good health. We see a similar trend too among the oldest age groups who are reporting fair or poor vision, those who are female. And for disability, we see again with those aged 50 to 79, those who reported a disability had on average lower creative activity scores compared to those not reporting a disability. When we looked at psychological health, we found that creative activity scores were consistently associated with higher quality of life and lower loneliness, lower depression, lower worry, and lower stress. In quality of life, we see a consistent trend at all age groups, with those reporting higher creative activity also reporting higher quality of life. Both males and females aged 50 to 69 reported lower loneliness when they were reporting moderate or high creative activity. And similarly for females who reported high creative activity, we found consistently lower depression scores. We also found positive associations with behavioural health. We found a higher prevalence of high physical activity in those reporting high creative activity. Among females, 35.5% who reported high creative activity also reported high physical activity, compared with just 24.7% of those who reported low creative activity. Just 13% of males who reported high creative activity reported being current smokers, compared with 18.2% of those who reported low creative activity. In the same groups in females, we see an even bigger difference. We found that 11.2% of females reporting high creative activity were current smokers, compared to 21.2% of those who reported low creative activity. We also found across time points between 2009 to 2018 that the prevalence of current smokers declines, as does physical activity, as expected in older ages. But we see the biggest decline in prevalence of smokers was among the group who increased from low or moderate creative activity to high levels of creative activity, while this same group saw the lowest decline in high physical activity. Finally, we looked at creative activity during the first COVID-19 lockdown. We asked participants if they participated in creative activities more often, about the same, less often, or not at all as compared with prior to the lockdown period. We found that 26% reported participating in creative activities more often, 35% in digital culture such as streaming or watching TV, and 37% reported reading more often. However, we also found that 32% now reported not doing creative activities either less often or not at all. We found that 10% reduced their activity in digital content such as streaming or watching TV, and a further 10% reported reading less often or not at all. We found that it was women who were more likely to report doing creative activities, hobbies, or crafts, but those in a rural area were less likely. We also found it was those in higher educational attainment who were now less likely to report doing creative activities, not at all. Among those who reported reading or participating in creative activities less often or not at all, they also reported lower quality of life, higher depression, higher loneliness, and higher perceived stress during the lockdown period. We found differences of around 0.5 point on average in loneliness for those reporting reading less often or not at all, but close to 3 points on average for depression scores for both males and females. Similarly, for creative activities, we see around 0.5 point on average of a difference in loneliness scores for both males and females. And again, for depression, scores on average higher for depression of around 1 to 2 points. To conclude, we did find that participation in creative activity was high among older community dwelling adults, with over half the sample being involved in creative activity on a weekly basis. We found that discrepancies in participation are still visible and do match the ones we see in the Growing Up in Ireland report. There was lower participation among those who had lower educational attainment, lower income, those who were living in a rural area, and those who reported worse health. But we found that higher levels of creative activity was consistently positively associated with better psychological and behavioural health in the older population. With this in mind, increasing access to creative activities may well act as a means of improving health and well-being, and has been very successfully integrated into healthcare settings, so there should be no barriers to access. And what this research has done has set out the foundations for future, more detailed analyses on creative activity. The 6th wave of Tilda has introduced a more detailed module for creative activity, which now captures much more granular detail on types of activity, types of participation, the barriers to participation, and also the motivations to participation for the older population. Thanks everyone for listening. Happy to take any questions, and I will hand the floor back to Olivia.
Thank you very much, Siobhan. Could we just explore a little bit with you what one means by creativity? Creativity is inclined to be associated with more highbrow things like composing music or painting or sculpture or literary writing. But I mean, could it be, in terms of what you're exploring, would it also include karaoke singing, sing-songs, and baking buns, and you know, ordinary stuff, reading VIP magazine, as well as going to Beethoven concerts or even playing in them?
Well, creative activity is just so far-ranging, and it's so individual as well to some extent. I think we took guidance from Creative Ireland on how we should define it for the Tilda study, of course, which is very helpful for us. But also, I think we have to take into account that what one activity might be creative to someone and it might not be creative to somebody else. So for me, baking is not very creative, depending on the way it turns out. But for somebody else, it might be that form
half
of
the country
expression.
at this stage, Siobhan, is saying, have you never watched the Great British Bake Off? Oh dear. But anyway, sorry.
So I think it's very much, it's an individual form of expression, and being able to just like I said in the presentation, to make or to do or even to watch, it's a shared form of expression as well, being able to engage in the creative activities that other people have put out for us. And it's changing all the time as well. We can see this explosion in digital culture during the lockdown period, with just streaming is always available to us. Movies are always available to us, and there's art forms now always online. We're doing different productions always visible to us wherever we go. So I think it's very difficult to define it to one individual thing. I think it's quite individual for the person as well, and what it relates to. But I very much think it's just a form of personal expression and shared expression of your creativity.
So it's something that engages the imagination and makes it work. Yeah. And I'll go on with Siobhan about this in a minute, but can I just turn to you for a minute on this, Roseanne?
There's been some lovely work actually specifically on ballroom dancing recently in the context of brain health, looking at brain health for healthy controls, but also in patients or people with early signs of dementia and established dementia and Parkinson's disease, from Joe Varghesi's group. And what they have shown is that ballroom dancing is particularly good at enhancing the brain connections I was talking about earlier on, and particularly if people have already compromised brain health. And if you think about ballroom dancing, it combines movement, which is executive function, involving these areas of the brain, music, having a partner generally, so engagement, concentration and memory to recall the steps you've just done and be able to repeat them, etc., and physical activity. So it pretty much combines a number of features, not just of creativity, but other components of health behaviors, which we know are really good at all ages.
Okay, really interesting that it helps with Parkinson's disease.
Parkinson's disease, yes.
Yeah, really interesting. Siobhan, just going back to you again, I mean, generally what the study is showing is that people who are better off and better educated participate more in creative engagement and a better well-being, but also that women generally will get more involved than men in creative activity. Why?
It's hard to say from the data that we have there exactly why. We need to delve into it a little bit more detail, but it's an accessibility thing as well, where I think often the classes are focused at female participants, and it wasn't typically a male participation kind of activity. And that's changing now, of course, but it's also because we're seeing these patterns from younger ages. This was established at a younger age, and now in later life, we're seeing the outcome of this, that male participants just aren't as heavily involved. They were possibly more directed towards sports, and we know that females less directed towards sports. So we might just be seeing this demographic difference now coming out in our older population. And I think that can shift, certainly, and I think it is shifting, but we just haven't caught up with it just yet.
Because sport and involvement and interest in sport, I suppose, could be regarded as creative too.
I think I'll defer to Tanya on this one.
Okay, listen, just one other thing. People in rural areas, in terms of access to whatever it might be, you know, reading groups or choirs or whatever it is, is that one of the reasons why people who live in rural areas score less high, that perhaps they're, number one, more isolated, but that transport can be a problem?
Yeah, certainly. And often when the classes are in person and people are getting older, personal transportation might be more difficult to come by. So we see that divide now in the rural areas. But I think in particularly with our COVID-19 research, where we saw that there was that demographic difference with access from rural areas for creative activities. Although we saw this explosion, like I say, of online participation, where we had classes online and it was becoming much more accessible to everybody. We know as well that the internet isn't always available in more rural areas, and there's always that divide. So again, it's not even transportation anymore. It's how to access it with the resources that they have, and it's changing, it's improving. But we can see quite certainly from our reports that those in a rural area are being divided from what they can access.
I can tell you from personal experience that that's one of the great divides in this country, is the broadband internet provision between rural and city areas. Going back to Professor Kenny, Roseanne, the value of this research, would you gauge that for us, and how does it fit in with studies internationally?
So so the value of the research, the impact on well-being and health is very big, and when you consider how much we put into new drugs, new research in those sorts of interventions, and then we have something almost on our doorstep, which in many ways has the same impact. I think that speaks for itself in terms of value and impact. In terms of international research, it's very consistent with respect to the benefits for well-being and health, but also to the cohorts who are more likely to participate. And I guess the value from that observation is how we really need to target those living in rural areas, as you've rightly said, but also lower socioeconomic groups. Income and education were two real drivers for lack of participation, and think outside the box in terms of engagement of those groups, and tailor creative opportunities by targeting those groups. And also persons, as they get older, you could see the drop off between wave 1 and wave 5, and that was because of ill health, mostly visual problems or disability, which was driven by physical health. So again, that's about tailoring opportunity for individuals rather than expecting one size to fit all.
Well, in terms of what you saw in your own hospital, St. James's, what are the challenges to embedding some of these, opportunities for creativity in the health system?
To be honest, one of the main challenges is actually getting buy-in, that this is something that's meaningful and has even scientific value, which is why I wanted to stress that this isn't a soft science, that there's good hard evidence for biological benefit. Getting buy-in from colleagues and healthcare providers is a challenge, because I don't think the knowledge or awareness is there of the benefits of creativity. And I can just say that certainly for the last 18 to 24 months, we've engaged locally here in Mercer's Institute, where I'm sitting now, with Creative Ireland and others who've helped to support creativity. And it's made a huge difference, not just to patients who weren't able to engage with their own families whilst they were in hospital because of the restrictions, but also to staff who were desperately in need of escape valves. And the feedback we got from staff, no matter what the creative activity was that we enabled during the last number of months, was incredibly positive.
So what sort of things did you engage in?
Exhibitions, mostly, that were cleanable, from an infection control perspective. We also actually created areas that staff could safely sit and socially engage whilst socially distanced in privacy, with color and calmness around them and different displays. That made a huge difference. We created outdoor spaces as well, again with interesting furniture and sitting areas, and new tree plantations. So I have to acknowledge St. James's here. They really got behind us on this initiative in terms of creating environment which was creative and accessible to staff.
Right. Tanya, I was just going to come in there and ask you.
Well, I was really just saying, Olivia, there's about 5 questions there in the Q&A, and I'm conscious that people may need to log off after 2. So we might just take some of those for the researcher or for Roseanne.
Okay, well, while we're doing that, I just wanted to ask you, what about that buy-in? The fact that there are so many demands on the health service, and how do you persuade policymakers to take on board what they may regard as sort of soft activity?
Well, I think things like this evidence, I think that the Tilda research as a whole is generally very influential on health policy. I mean, I think in general, we're all working towards the same thing. Everybody wants a better quality of life for longer. And I think there is enormous goodwill and willingness to collaborate across both the cultural and creative sectors and the health sectors. But I guess perhaps it would be fair to say that the creative and health sectors will have different priorities, different cultures, different operating processes, and sometimes different understandings of what success looks like. So sometimes it can feel like there's a different language at times, but I think the key thing is presenting the kind of evidence that Dr. Scarlett has presented. I think that's what will prove influential.
Okay, well, some questions coming in from people who are watching here. And Siobhan, there's one here in particular. Was there a difference in creative activity in the different decades after age 60? I think you said there was.
Between 50 to 74 years, there actually wasn't. They were quite consistent. We found a slight dip around retirement age, but it picked up quite quickly afterwards. But after age 75, it declined quite rapidly. So that's where we see that inflection of decreased activity in the older population, and probably the age group we really need to target in terms of getting back involved.
And this person also wanted to know what the extent of use was by these people of digital technology, smartphones, social media among the people researched.
Yeah, so we don't cover this in this report, but Tilda does have a report focused specifically on this. And we know that 71% of adults have access to the internet in their homes, and 64% have smartphones or tablets. And of those, 85% would actually use the internet weekly. So it is quite high for access to the internet, but still only 64% actually have access to smartphones or tablets.
And another questioner here wants to know, was there a difference in the perceived benefit according to whether the creative activity was passive or active?
We wanted to explore this in more detail, but we actually, it was quite difficult with the data that we have, because the participation levels in passive are just so high. You saw with 94%, reporting that they engage with music or listen to music, and such a high number of people reading as well. So it was quite difficult to break this down between just passive or active rather than combining the two. We didn't find huge differences when we first looked at it, but what we will be able to do with the new data that we're producing is look at this in much more detail, because we have all of the activities themselves actually broken down into individual activities rather than a sort of more combined version that we have at the moment.
Okay, and a quick one to you, and then I'll throw it to Roseanne. A question that had struck me actually as well. Can you comment on the direction of the associations that you found? What's driving what? Does depression lower creative activity, or does creative activity lower depression?
Yeah, this is a limitation of the report, all right, and we refer to this in the report. We can't confirm the directionality of the association with what we've done here. We would have to look at more complex analyses, but from international research, there are quite promising results showing that engagement in creative activity does lower depressive symptoms. And again, it's something that we're hoping to do in follow-up research on this area, but the report can't confirm this, unfortunately.
Roseanne,
I would say, Olivia, just to that I think what Siobhan has done is deep dive on previous questionnaires, which, shall we say, were not adapted for our purposes. But the whole purpose of funding this research now is that from now on, there will be a detailed questionnaire that will look into that will ask those kind of questions, and hopefully we'll be able to answer Brian's question in the next wave.
Okay, and Tanya, since you're there, an example that you can give us, because that film that you showed was really very interesting. An example you can give us of where money's been invested in creative activities and you've seen results.
Well, I suppose we're at the early stages. Creative Ireland has probably invested roughly 600 to 800,000 euro per year last year and this year, but we haven't been going long enough to say, other than the anecdotal and the personal kind of testimony, and then accompanied by the Tilda research, But all the feedback we have got from the partners we've worked with, many of whom are on this call, so we have Age and Opportunity, the Age Friendly Network, local authorities, Creative Ireland coordinators in local authorities, is just hugely moving personal testimony that people really got a huge amount out of it. Does that count?
Yeah, and I mean, I remember somebody talking the other day about quite a lot of money invested in Ballymun as a way of, you know, regenerating the community there, and that had had very positive results. Did you find that, Tanya?
I am aware of that, because obviously Ballymun regeneration has been going for, gosh, nearly 2 decades now. So they have that long-term research that we don't have yet. But the purpose of having that Tilda cohort is, if from now on we are able to really drill down in a lot more detail in future waves, I'm hoping that will give Professor Kenny the kind of arguments that she needs, together with the international research of other sort of Tildas in other countries, to make that evidence base really clear to not only those, I see Mary Graham has put a comment in there, it's not really for the arts and culture sector who, shall we say, are convinced, but it's probably more for, as Roseanne said, her health colleagues, those at the top of acute hospitals, those running community health facilities and health policy makers. I think it's to raise the awareness of the benefits there.
Okay, and Roseanne, just looking again, the sort of gaps that there might be in the research that you think we'll be able to improve in times to come.
Well, I'd say twofold. The first is a more granularity about creative activities, actually, and a better understanding of what constitutes active and passive, and within that, then the directionality of the research. In terms of causality, so what's causing what, and very often that's difficult to tease out even in longitudinal studies, but certainly if we're going to get there, it's a longitudinal study that will allow that. I would love the opportunity to look at this biologically in more detail, and we now have the ability to measure our biological clocks, which is, rather than your chronological age, understanding what age biologically your cells are. And we know that biological aging and the pace of that accelerated biological aging can start very early on, and even studies showing starts in one's 30s. We have the capacity to measure biological aging in a small number of Tilda participants, so it would be nice to look at that, and actually maybe even to extend understanding biological aging more, because that would really add to the science and understanding and the justification and case for the import of creativity.
Yeah, because there's a very interesting question here. You know, why is older age defined as age 50 plus? It seems a young age and difficult to compare like for like with age 65 plus, which is retirement age.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I totally agree. Now, why did we choose 50 in Tilda? We chose 50 in Tilda because that was a pretty good age to start looking at different elements of physical and brain health, which gradually decline over time. 40 actually is a better threshold, but in order to capture a representative population over 40, we needed an awful lot more money and a much, much bigger sample size. So 50 was the cutoff, and it's the one that's been chosen by virtually all of the 26 sister studies on aging that we're involved in. So it's not about 50 is young or old or anything in that context. It's about trying to identify a biological threshold that we can follow to understand the process of aging and early indicators of that process. Also, we work, Olivia, with very false thresholds with respect to 65. And if you like geriatric medicine and admission for multi-morbidity and a number of different chronic disorders and frailty, etc. 65, the only reason 65 is a cutoff is because of compulsory retirement at 65 and 60 for men and 60 for women for so long. That's the rationale. So it doesn't make any rationale in terms of health provision. So, so those numbers are nonsense. More and more, we are interested in exploring biological age and innovative ways of actually addressing that whole ridiculous issue of number.
And
Olivia,
Siobhan,
can I just pop in there? There's a question from Grania Hope that I think possibly Siobhan can answer. So we have a new detailed questionnaire. She was asking what are the kind of questions you will be asking. So it might be possible, Siobhan, for you to sort of put a link to that draft questionnaire so people can kind of see the more detailed questions that will be asked in future.
So this isn't on our website just yet, but we can put it up after the call probably, and we can it'll be available through the Tilda website then. So because we haven't completed the wave of data collection, we just haven't released all the questionnaires for it just yet, but it will be available quite soon. But we ask about individual types of activities such as dancing, singing, photography, much more detailed than what we have. We ask about participation in group activities or whether they participate in a solo basis. We ask about a huge range of motivations for participation and which they would consider the most important to them. And we also, for those who tell us that they don't participate, we ask about what the barriers are. So then we can really delve into, is it an accessibility thing? Is it that there's nothing available? Is it that they're just not interested? So we hope now within the next year, we're going to have a much more detailed analysis to complement what we've done here.
A killer point for you, Tanya. Can governments save money? Because I would imagine this would make a lot of what you're talking about much more palatable. The economic argument for acting on these findings about the link between creativity and well-being in older age. Can governments save money?
I don't know if governments can save money, but what I would say is that government has made a commitment to the value of creativity. We're one of the first countries in the world where a government has said, we believe that creativity is important for our well-being as a nation, and we are together trying to put creativity at the centre of public policy. That's what the Creative Ireland programme is about. So in essence, every government department and programme is asked to think, well, how does culture and creativity impact upon our work? So it's not necessarily about more resources. There are resources there, but it can be about directing existing resources to funding this kind of work because it is better appreciated and valued.
I was married to an economist, Tanya. You see, he would always say to me, give them an economic argument and you will win. Yeah. Listen, we're coming to the end of our time. So I just want to give a quick opportunity to Roseanne Kenny first, then to Tanya to do a quick sum up for us.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Olivia, and thank you to everybody. I mean, I think the bottom line is that there's evidence, strong evidence of the benefits of creativity for health and well-being, and without actually having the economic evidence, I would say that it's a very, very safe bet that creativity will save money in the long term. Our last number of years of life are very often our most expensive years for health and social care, and anything which can compress those years will undoubtedly make a difference to the economy.
Thank you. And Tanya?
I suppose I would just say this research is for everybody on this webinar. The whole point is we hope will be useful for you in your individual case making from whatever organisation or part of government you're in. This is the first part of this research. We would certainly, once Siobhan has completed the next wave, like to share more with you. But we hope it will be a powerful tool for you to make the case for the kind of resources that are needed to support this work.
Okay, and for anybody watching, you can find the report that we've been talking about today, Siobhan's work. You can find it on the Tilda website or in the chat box, and it makes very interesting reading. So just to say thanks to our panel today and for everybody who tuned in. And we hope the policymakers are listening. Goodbye.